They told me to stay quiet, to be grateful, to protect their name even if it meant burying my truth. But when my son cried in that cold hospital room and no one came to hold him, I knew survival wasn't enough. I needed justice, and this is how I got it. Zola lay in the hospital bed, her body aching with the aftershocks of labor, the sterile scent of disinfectant clinging to the air. The fluorescent lights above flickered, casting harsh shadows on the pale blue walls. She cradled her newborn son, his tiny chest rising and falling against her skin, the only warmth in a room that felt colder by the minute. The world outside was silent, but inside her heart pounded with a mixture of exhaustion and hope. She had waited for this moment, dreamed of it through months of uncertainty, believing that the arrival of her child would finally bring her family together. But as the minutes ticked by, her husband was nowhere to be seen. Nurses came and went, offering polite smiles and gentle encouragement, but Zola's eyes never left the door. Each time it opened, her breath caught, only to fall again when it was just another stranger. Finally, the door swung open with a burst of laughter and the click of expensive shoes on linoleum. Kofi entered, his suit immaculate, his hair perfectly styled, as if he'd just come from a celebration rather than the birth of his child. Behind him trailed his mother, Mrs. Audit, her lips pursed in disapproval, and his younger sister Nala, who barely glanced at Zola before turning her attention to her phone. The room, once filled with the soft sounds of a newborn, now bristled with tension. Kofi's eyes swept over Zola and the baby, his expression unreadable. He didn't move closer, didn't offer a word of comfort or congratulations. Instead, he stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, a wall between them that felt insurmountable. "You're late," Zola whispered, her voice barely audible, raw from hours of pain and anticipation. Kofi didn't answer. He looked at the baby, then at his mother, as if seeking silent confirmation of something only they understood. Mrs. Audit stepped forward, her gaze icy. "So this is the child," she said, her tone flat. "He doesn't look like a Dumont." Nala snickered, her laughter sharp and cruel. Zola's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she held her son tighter, willing herself not to cry. She had imagined this moment so differently: a family united, a father's proud smile, a grandmother's gentle touch. Instead, she felt exposed, judged, and utterly alone. Kofi finally spoke, his words slicing through the silence. "I'm not signing anything," he declared, his voice cold and final. "That child is not mine." The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. Zola stared at him, disbelief and heartbreak warring in her chest. "Kofi, please," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "He's your son, look at him." But Kofi shook his head, his jaw set. "Don't embarrass yourself, Zola. I won't give my name to a child that isn't mine." Mrs. Audit nodded in agreement, her satisfaction barely concealed. "We warned you, Kofi. Some women will do anything to climb the ladder." Nala rolled her eyes, already bored with the spectacle. The humiliation was complete. Zola felt the walls closing in, the weight of their accusations pressing down on her until she could barely breathe. She wanted to scream, to defend herself, to make them see the truth, but the words caught in her throat. The baby began to cry, his tiny fist waving in the air as if sensing his mother's distress. Zola rocked him gently, whispering soothing words she barely believed herself. The nurses exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. The room was thick with judgment, every glance a silent accusation. Just as Kofi turned to leave, the door opened again and Dr. Amadi entered, his face grave. He glanced at the tense gathering, then at Zola, his eyes softening with concern. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice calm but commanding. Kofi straightened, his bravado faltering under the doctor's steady gaze. "I refuse to sign the birth certificate," he announced. "This child isn't mine." Dr. Amadi looked at the baby, then at Kofi, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Dumont, I think you should hear what I have to say before making any decisions." The room fell silent, all eyes on the doctor. Mrs. Audit bristled, her authority challenged. "We've heard enough, doctor. My son knows what he's doing." But Dr. Amadi didn't back down. He moved closer to Zola, checking the baby's vitals with practiced hands. "There are some medical concerns I need to discuss," he said, his tone measured. "Concerns that affect not just the child, but your entire family." Kofi frowned, uncertainty flickering across his face. "What are you talking about?" The doctor hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Your son has a rare genetic marker, one that doesn't match either of you in the way we'd expect. I recommend further testing before any decisions are made." The words landed like a thunderclap. For a moment no one spoke. Zola's heart raced, confusion and fear mingling in her chest. Kofi's confidence wavered, his eyes darting between the doctor and his mother. Mrs. Audit's face paled, her composure slipping. Nala looked up from her phone, suddenly interested. The room, once filled with certainty and accusation, was now thick with doubt and unease. Dr. Amadi's gaze lingered on Zola, a silent promise that the truth would come out no matter how deeply it was buried. As the doctor left, the family stood frozen, the foundation of their certainty shaken. Zola clung to her son, her mind racing with questions she was too afraid to ask. The humiliation of moments before was replaced by a new, more terrifying uncertainty. What did the doctor mean? What secret was hidden in her child's blood? And what would happen when the truth finally came to light? The answers she knew would change everything. Before the hospital, before the accusations and the cold stares, Zola's world was a patchwork of simple joys and quiet dreams. She grew up in a modest house on the edge of Houston's historic Third Ward, where the air was thick with the scent of magnolia and the laughter of children spilled out into the streets. Her mother, a schoolteacher, filled their home with books and music, teaching Zola that happiness was not measured by what you owned, but by the love you gave and received. Evenings were spent on the porch, listening to the hum of cicadas and the stories of neighbors who had known hardship and hope in equal measure. Zola learned early that life was not always easy, but it could be beautiful if you looked for the light. She was a quiet child, content to lose herself in the pages of a novel or the gentle rhythm of her mother's humming. Her father had passed away when she was young, leaving behind a legacy of kindness and a garden that Zola tended with care. She grew up believing in the goodness of people, in the promise of new beginnings, and in the quiet strength that came from surviving loss. Her mother's love was a constant, a shelter from the storms that sometimes swept through their lives. Together, they made do with what they had, finding joy in small celebrations and the comfort of each other's company. Zola's world changed the day she met Kofi Dumont. He was everything she was not: confident, outgoing, the center of every room he entered. He came into the library where she worked, searching for a rare book, and left with her heart. Kofi was the son of a prominent family, his life a whirlwind of charity galas and business meetings, but he seemed drawn to Zola's quiet warmth. He listened to her stories, laughed at her jokes, and made her feel seen in a way no one else ever had. Their courtship was a whirlwind of late-night phone calls, stolen moments in city parks, and promises whispered beneath the stars. For the first time, Zola allowed herself to dream of a future beyond the boundaries of her small world. Kofi spoke of travel, of building a life together, of children who would inherit the best of both their families. He painted pictures of a home filled with laughter, of holidays spent surrounded by love, of a partnership built on trust and respect. Zola believed him, wanted to believe that she could have it all: a love that would heal old wounds and create new memories. She introduced him to her mother, who saw the way Kofi looked at her daughter and smiled with hope. Their wedding was a modest affair, held in the backyard of Zola's childhood home. Friends and family gathered beneath strings of lights, sharing food and stories, dancing late into the night. Kofi's family attended, their presence a mixture of obligation and curiosity. Mrs. Audit, regal and reserved, offered polite congratulations but kept her distance, her eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for something out of place. Nala, Kofi's younger sister, barely spoke to Zola, her attention fixed on her phone. Still, Zola was too happy to notice the chill in their smiles, too caught up in the promise of a new beginning to see the shadows lurking at the edges. The first months of marriage were a dream. Kofi was attentive, bringing her flowers for no reason, surprising her with dinners at her favorite restaurants, and holding her close on nights when the world felt too big. They moved into a small apartment downtown, filling it with second-hand furniture and the laughter of two people in love. Zola started a new job at the community library, while Kofi worked long hours at his family's real estate firm. They talked about the future, about children and travel, about building a life that would honor both their families. But as the seasons changed, so did the tone of their life together. Kofi's work became more demanding, his absences more frequent. He began to bring home the stress of the office, his temper flaring over small things. Zola tried to be understanding, to offer comfort and support, but she sometimes felt as if she was reaching for someone who was already slipping away. The apartment that had once felt like a sanctuary now echoed with arguments and silences that stretched late into the night. It was during these times that Kofi's family began to assert their presence. Mrs. Audit would call at odd hours, her voice clipped and businesslike, offering unsolicited advice on everything from Zola's cooking to her choice of friends. She insisted on weekly dinners at the Dumont mansion, where Zola felt out of place among the polished silver and whispered conversations. Nala, ever the observer, watched Zola with a mixture of amusement and disdain, her comments sharp and often cutting. Kofi, caught between his wife and his family, grew distant, his loyalties divided. Zola tried to bridge the gap, to win over her in-laws with kindness and patience, but nothing seemed to be enough. Mrs. Audit questioned her every decision, from the way she decorated their apartment to the friends she invited over. She made it clear that Zola was an outsider, someone who would never truly belong to the Dumont legacy. Kofi, for his part, began to echo his mother's criticisms, his words sometimes laced with the same coldness that Zola had once only seen in Mrs. Audit's eyes. Despite the growing tension, Zola clung to the hope that things would get better. She focused on the love that had brought them together, on the memories of laughter and shared dreams. When she discovered she was pregnant, she believed it was a sign, a chance to start fresh, to heal the rifts that had formed between them. She imagined Kofi holding their child, imagined the joy that would fill their home, imagined a future where love would conquer all. But even as she decorated the nursery and read parenting books late into the night, Zola couldn't ignore the unease that had settled in her heart. Kofi was often absent, his excuses vague and his affection waning. Mrs. Audit's visits became more frequent, her criticisms sharper. Nala's indifference turned to open hostility. Zola felt increasingly isolated, her world shrinking to the walls of their apartment and the growing life inside her. She tried to reach out to Kofi to remind him of the dreams they had shared, but he seemed more interested in pleasing his family than in building a life with her. Still, Zola held on to hope. She believed in the power of love, in the promise of new beginnings, in the strength that had carried her through so many storms. She told herself that once the baby arrived, everything would change. They would become a family, united by the love they had once shared. She clung to that dream, even as the cracks in her marriage widened, even as the shadows grew longer. In her heart, she believed that love would be enough. She had no way of knowing just how much her faith would be tested, or how far she would have to go to protect the life she had built. The hospital room, once a place of hope and anticipation, had become a stage for Zola's humiliation. The air was thick with judgment, every glance from Kofi and his family a silent accusation. The baby, sensing the tension, whimpered in her arms, his tiny face scrunching in distress. Zola pressed her lips to his forehead, desperate to shield him from the storm swirling around them. But there was no shelter, not from the words that would follow, nor from the wounds they would leave behind. Kofi stood at the foot of the bed, his arms crossed, his jaw clenched. He refused to look at Zola, his gaze fixed on the floor as if the sight of her was too much to bear. Mrs. Audit hovered nearby, her presence cold and unyielding, while Nala leaned against the wall, her eyes flicking between her brother and mother, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, until Mrs. Audit finally spoke. "I warned you, Kofi," she said, her voice sharp as glass. "Some women will do anything to trap a man. You should have listened to your family." Her words sliced through the room, each syllable a reminder of Zola's outsider status. Kofi nodded, his face hardening. "I can't trust you, Zola, not after this. The timing, the way things happened, it doesn't add up. I don't know who that child belongs to, but it isn't me." Zola's heart pounded in her chest, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. "Kofi, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You know me. You know I would never," but he cut her off with a wave of his hand, his eyes cold and distant. "Don't embarrass yourself. My family's reputation is at stake. I won't let you drag us through the mud." Mrs. Audit nodded in approval, her satisfaction barely concealed. "You did the right thing, Kofi. We can't let her ruin everything we've built." Nala snickered, her laughter echoing in the sterile room. Maybe she thought she could get away with it. Maybe she thought you'd be too blind to see the truth. Zola felt the walls closing in, the weight of their accusations pressing down on her until she could barely breathe. She wanted to scream, to defend herself, to make them see the truth, but the words caught in her throat. The baby began to cry, his tiny fists waving in the air as if sensing his mother's distress. Zola rocked him gently, whispering soothing words she barely believed herself. The nurses exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. The room was thick with judgment, every glance a silent accusation. Zola's world shrank to the space between her and her child, the only anchor in a sea of hostility. She clung to him, her tears falling silently onto his blanket. The humiliation was complete. She had never felt so alone. As the hours passed, the accusations only grew sharper. Kofi refused to sign the birth certificate, his refusal a public declaration of his doubt. Mrs. Audit made calls to family friends, spreading rumors before Zola had even left the hospital. Nala posted cryptic messages on social media, fueling speculation and gossip. Zola's phone buzzed with messages from friends and acquaintances, some offering support, others demanding explanations. She ignored them all, unable to find the words to explain the nightmare she was living. The doctor's words lingered in her mind, a puzzle she couldn't solve. "There are some medical concerns I need to discuss. Concerns that affect not just the child but your entire family." What did he mean? What secret was hidden in her child's blood? Zola replayed the conversation over and over, searching for answers. She remembered the way the doctor had looked at her, the concern in his eyes, the way he had chosen his words so carefully. It was as if he knew something she didn't, something that could change everything. But in the days that followed, there was no time for answers. Zola was discharged from the hospital with little ceremony, her belongings packed into a plastic bag, her dignity in tatters. Kofi didn't offer to drive her home. Instead, he handed her a stack of papers, medical bills, insurance forms, and a note from his lawyer. "You'll need to figure things out on your own," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "My family can't be involved in this mess." Zola left the hospital alone, her son bundled in her arms, the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. The city outside was bright and bustling, but to Zola it felt like a foreign land. She hailed a cab, her hands shaking as she gave the driver her mother's address. The ride was silent, the only sound the soft whimpers of her baby and the pounding of her own heart. She stared out the window, watching the world blur by, her dreams dissolving with every passing mile. When she arrived at her mother's house, the door was locked, the windows dark. Her mother was in the hospital herself, her health failing, her absence another wound in Zola's already battered heart. She sat on the porch, her baby in her arms, and wept for the life she had lost. The neighbors watched from behind their curtains, their whispers following her like a shadow. Zola felt exposed, judged, and utterly alone. Days turned into weeks and the isolation only deepened. Kofi cut off all contact, blocking her number and freezing their joint accounts. Mrs. Audit sent a letter, cold and formal, demanding that Zola return the family heirlooms she had received as wedding gifts. Nala posted photos of family gatherings, each one a reminder of the life Zola had been cast out of. The community, once a source of comfort, became a minefield of gossip and suspicion. Zola avoided the grocery store, the library, even the park where she used to walk. She couldn't bear the stares, the whispered questions, the pitying looks. The only constant was her son, whose needs forced her to keep moving, to keep fighting, even when she wanted to give up. She found odd jobs, cleaning houses and running errands, anything to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. She sold her wedding ring, her only valuable possession, to pay for diapers and formula. Each day was a battle, each night a test of endurance. Zola's dreams of a happy family, of a loving husband and a safe home faded into memory, replaced by the harsh reality of survival. Yet through it all, the doctor's words haunted her. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, that the truth was just out of reach. She replayed every conversation, every glance, every moment in the hospital, searching for clues. The uncertainty gnawed at her, a constant reminder that her nightmare was far from over. She thought the worst had already happened, that she had lost everything she could lose. But as she would soon discover, the real nightmare was just beginning. Zola stepped out of the hospital into the harsh glare of the afternoon sun, her newborn son bundled tightly against her chest. The world outside felt too bright, too loud, as if it had moved on without her. She clutched the hospital's thin blanket around her baby, her own coat forgotten in the chaos of her discharge. The cab ride home was silent, the driver glancing at her in the rearview mirror, perhaps wondering why a woman with a newborn looked so utterly alone. She gave her mother's address, though she knew the house would be empty. Her mother was still in the hospital, her health failing, and Zola had nowhere else to go. The house greeted her with silence and dust. She unlocked the door, stepping into the familiar but now foreign space. The furniture was covered in sheets, the air stale. She set her son down in the crib her mother had kept for visiting grandchildren, the only sign of life in the room. Zola sat on the edge of the bed, her body aching, her mind numb. She had imagined this moment so differently, coming home with her husband, introducing their son to his grandmother, celebrating the start of a new chapter. Instead, she was alone, her dreams scattered like the dust motes in the fading light. The first days blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and fear. Zola rationed the formula samples from the hospital, counting every scoop, every bottle. She ate what little food was left in the pantry, stretching cans of soup and stale bread. The neighbors noticed her return, their curiosity quickly turning to gossip. Whispers followed her when she ventured outside, about the baby, about Kofi, about what kind of woman was abandoned so soon after giving birth. Zola kept her head down, her shoulders hunched, her world shrinking to the four walls of her mother's house. The phone calls started almost immediately. Bill collectors, hospital administrators, and most painfully, Kofi's lawyer. The message was clear: she was on her own. The joint bank account was frozen, her name removed from every document that mattered. The credit cards were declined at the grocery store, her attempts to withdraw cash met with cold rejection. She sold her wedding ring at a pawn shop, the money barely enough to buy diapers and a week's worth of groceries. Each transaction felt like a piece of her old life slipping away, replaced by a gnawing sense of desperation. Zola tried to reach out to Kofi, leaving messages that went unanswered. She called his office only to be told he was unavailable. She wrote letters, pouring her heart onto the page, but they were returned unopened. Mrs. Audit sent a courier to collect the last of Zola's belongings from the apartment, her note brief and impersonal: return all items belonging to the Dumont family. Do not contact us again. Nala posted photos of family dinners and vacations, each image a reminder of the life Zola had been so ruthlessly cut out of. The community that had once embraced her now turned its back. At the corner store, the cashier avoided her eyes, ringing up her purchases in silence. At church, the pews seemed to shift away, the prayers for her mother's recovery now tinged with pity and suspicion. Even her old friends kept their distance, unsure what to say, afraid of being caught in the crossfire of scandal. Zola felt invisible, her existence reduced to a cautionary tale whispered behind closed doors. Her body, still healing from childbirth, ached with every movement. The nights were the hardest, the baby's cries echoing in the empty house, her own tears falling silently in the dark. She rocked him for hours, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. She told him stories of hope, of love, of a future where he would never feel the sting of rejection. But as the days wore on, her strength began to wane. The exhaustion was bone deep, her spirit battered by the relentless tide of hardship. Desperation forced her to seek work, any work. She cleaned houses for neighbors who paid her in cash, their sympathy thinly veiled behind forced smiles. She took in laundry, mended clothes, ran errands for the elderly. Every dollar was stretched to its limit, every meal a careful calculation. She learned to go without to make do, to survive on hope and determination alone. The baby grew, his needs constant, his presence both a comfort and a reminder of all she had lost. One afternoon, as Zola returned from a long day of cleaning, she found an envelope slipped under the door. There was no return address, no name, just her own written in careful script. Her hands trembled as she opened it, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the message brief but chilling: "You don't know the whole story. The truth is closer than you think." There was no signature, no clue as to who had sent it. Zola stared at the letter, her mind racing. Was it a threat, a warning, or a lifeline thrown to her in the midst of her despair? She read the words over and over, searching for meaning, for hope, for anything that might explain the nightmare her life had become. The doctor's cryptic comments echoed in her mind, mingling with the anonymous message. She felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in weeks: curiosity, maybe even hope. Perhaps she wasn't as alone as she thought. Perhaps the story wasn't over yet. As night fell, Zola sat by the window, the letter clutched in her hand, her son sleeping peacefully beside her. The world outside was dark and uncertain, but for the first time since leaving the hospital, she felt a spark of determination. She would find the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. She would fight for her son, for herself, for the life she had been denied. The letter was a sign, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was always a chance for light to break through. The real story, she realized, was just beginning. The letter haunted Zola through the night, its words echoing in her mind long after the house had gone quiet. She read it again and again, searching for hidden meaning, for a clue to the sender's identity. "You don't know the whole story. The truth is closer than you think." It was both a warning and a riddle, and as dawn crept through the curtains, Zola knew she couldn't ignore it. The pain of Kofi's rejection, the humiliation from his family, the isolation and poverty, none of it made sense if there was more to the story. She needed answers, not just for herself, but for her son. With trembling hands, she dialed the hospital and asked for Dr. Amati. The receptionist hesitated, but Zola's voice was urgent, her desperation impossible to ignore. "Please," she pleaded, "I need to speak with him. It's about my baby." Hours later, she found herself back in the hospital's waiting room, the same antiseptic smell and harsh lighting, but this time she was alone, no family to support her, no husband to hold her hand. She clutched her son to her chest, her heart pounding as she waited for the doctor to appear. Dr. Amati greeted her with a gentle smile, his eyes kind but serious. He led her into his office, closing the door behind them. "Zola, I'm glad you came," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I've been concerned about you and your child." Zola nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I received a letter. It said I don't know the whole story. I need to know the truth, doctor. Please help me." Dr. Amati listened carefully, his expression grave. "I remember the complications during your delivery and the unusual genetic marker we found in your son's initial tests. At the time, I didn't want to alarm you, but now I think it's important we investigate further." He explained the process of genetic testing, how it could reveal not only medical risks but also paternity. "If you're willing, we can run a test to compare your son's DNA with yours and, if possible, with your husband's." Zola hesitated, the thought of confirming Kofi's suspicions filling her with dread, but the need for truth outweighed her fear. "Do it," she said, her voice steady. "I need to know." The test was quick, a swab from her cheek, another from her son. Dr. Amati promised to call as soon as the results were ready. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and anticipation. Zola went through the motions of daily life, caring for her son, working odd jobs, but her mind was consumed by questions. Who had sent the letter? What would the test reveal? She replayed every moment of her marriage, every interaction with Kofi's family, searching for signs she had missed. The doctor's words echoed in her mind, mingling with the anonymous warning. "The truth is closer than you think." When the call finally came, Zola's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the phone. Dr. Amati's voice was calm but urgent. "Can you come to my office? I have the results." Zola bundled her son and hurried to the hospital, her heart pounding with fear and hope. She sat across from the doctor, her breath shallow, her eyes fixed on the envelope in his hands. "Zola," he began gently, "the results are unexpected. Your son's DNA does not match your husband's. He is not the biological father." The words hit her like a physical blow, her breath catching in her throat. "But there's more," Dr. Amati continued. "The genetic marker we found is rare, but it matches someone closely related to your husband, a brother perhaps, or even his father." Zola stared at him, her mind reeling. "That's not possible," she whispered. "I was never with anyone else. Never." Dr. Amati nodded, his expression sympathetic. "I believe you, Zola, but the science is clear. The DNA is a close match to your husband's family, but not to him. I think you need to consider who else in that family had access to you, especially during times when your husband was away." The room spun, memories flashing through Zola's mind: nights when Kofi was on business trips, times when she stayed at the Dumont mansion, moments when she felt watched, uneasy, but dismissed her fears as paranoid. The realization crept in slowly, chilling her to the bone. Could it be Kofi's brother, his father? The thought was too terrible to voice, but it refused to leave her mind. She remembered the way Mr. Dumont looked at her, the way he lingered in the hallway, the way he insisted she stay at the mansion when Kofi was away. She remembered a night when she felt dizzy after dinner, waking up in her guest room with no memory of how she got there. She had dismissed it as exhaustion, but now doubt gnawed at her. Zola left the hospital in a daze, the weight of the truth pressing down on her. She walked the city streets, her son asleep in his stroller, her mind racing. The betrayal was deeper than she had imagined, the pain sharper. Not only had Kofi abandoned her, but someone in his family had violated her trust in the most unforgivable way. The letter's warning made sense now. The truth was closer than she had ever realized. She returned home, locking the door behind her, her hands trembling as she held her son. She looked into his eyes, searching for answers, for comfort, for the strength to face what came next. The doctor's words echoed in her mind, mingling with the memory of the letter. The real father was someone she never suspected. The nightmare she thought was ending had only just begun. As night fell, Zola sat in the darkness, her son cradled in her arms, the letter and the test results spread out on the table before her. She knew she couldn't keep this secret, couldn't let her son grow up in the shadow of lies and betrayal. She would have to confront the Dumont family, demand answers, and fight for justice, not just for herself but for her child. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. The next chapter of her story would be written in courage, no matter how much it cost her. The days after the DNA results were a blur of sleepless nights and anxious thoughts, but something inside Zola had shifted. The shock and grief that had paralyzed her began to give way to a new, burning determination. She looked at her son, her reason, her anchor, and knew she could not let him grow up in the shadow of secrets and shame. The Dumonts had tried to erase her, to silence her, but she would not be erased. She would not be silent. For the first time since her world had fallen apart, Zola felt a flicker of hope, a sense of purpose that steadied her trembling hands. She started with what little she had: memories, observations, and the names of those who had been present in the mansion during the months before her son was born. She wrote everything down in a battered notebook, piecing together timelines, recalling conversations, and noting every odd glance or unexplained kindness. She remembered the night she had felt dizzy after dinner, the way Mr. Dumont had insisted she stay at the mansion, the way Nala had avoided her eyes the next morning. The puzzle was far from complete, but Zola was determined to find every missing piece. One afternoon, as she sat on the porch with her son, a gentle voice called out from across the street. "Zola, honey, you look like you could use some company." It was Mrs. Ketta, her mother's old friend and a fixture in the neighborhood. The older woman brought over a plate of warm cornbread and a pot of tea, settling beside Zola with a knowing smile. "I've seen the way people look at you, the way they whisper. Don't let them get to you. You're stronger than you think." Zola felt tears prick her eyes, the kindness almost too much to bear. She poured out her story, the betrayal, the letter, the DNA results, and the fear that haunted her every step. Mrs. Ketta listened without judgment, her hand resting gently on Zola's arm. "You're not alone, child. I've seen families like the Dumonts before, powerful, proud, and willing to do anything to protect their own. But secrets have a way of coming to light, especially when a mother is fighting for her child." She offered to help in any way she could, promising to keep an eye out for anything unusual and to spread the word among her friends. Zola felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel completely alone. Encouraged by Mrs. Ketta's support, Zola took the next step. She visited the local legal aid office, her son bundled in her arms, her heart pounding with nerves. The waiting room was crowded, the air thick with worry and hope. When her name was called, she was ushered into a small office where a young woman with sharp eyes and a kind smile introduced herself as Imani Grant. "Tell me everything," Imani said, her voice steady and reassuring. Zola did, holding nothing back. She showed Imani the letter, the DNA results, and described the events that had led her to this point. Imani listened intently, taking notes and asking careful questions. "You have a case, Zola," she said when Zola finished, "but it won't be easy. The Dumonts have money, influence, and a reputation to protect. They'll fight back and they'll fight dirty. But you have the truth on your side and you have me." She explained the legal options: filing for child support, demanding a formal investigation, and if necessary, going public with the story. "It's your choice," Imani said. "But whatever you decide, I'll stand with you." Zola felt a surge of gratitude and relief. She had an ally, someone who believed her, someone who would fight for her and her son. Together, they began to gather evidence: medical records, witness statements, and anything that could shed light on what had happened in the Dumont mansion. Imani reached out to contacts in the media, warning them to be ready for a story that would shake the city. Mrs. Ketta rallied the neighborhood, quietly gathering stories and rumors, piecing together a picture of a family that had long operated above the law. As the days passed, Zola's confidence grew. She learned to navigate the legal system, to ask the right questions, to demand answers. She confronted her own fears, refusing to be intimidated by the Dumonts' threats or the community's whispers. She found strength in her son's laughter, in the warmth of Mrs. Ketta's kitchen, in the steady presence of Imani's support. Each small victory, a document obtained, a witness found, a rumor confirmed, fueled her resolve. But the Dumonts did not sit idly by. Kofi's lawyer sent letters threatening legal action, accusing Zola of slander and extortion. Mrs. Audit appeared at her door one evening, her face a mask of icy composure. "You're making a mistake, Zola. You're ruining your son's future, and for what? Revenge?" Zola stood her ground, her voice steady. "I'm fighting for the truth, for my son, for myself. You can't scare me anymore." Mrs. Audit left without another word, but Zola knew the battle was only beginning. Through it all, Zola clung to the hope that justice was possible. She dreamed of a day when her son would know the truth, when he would be free from the shadow of the Dumont's lies. She vowed to keep fighting, no matter how long it took, no matter how high the cost. The turning point had come not in a moment of triumph, but in the quiet, stubborn refusal to give up. Zola was no longer the woman who had left the hospital in tears. She was a mother on a mission, a survivor determined to reclaim her life. As she tucked her son into bed one night, Zola whispered a promise into the darkness. "I will find the truth, I will protect you, and I will never let anyone hurt us again." The words hung in the air, a vow stronger than any threat, any secret, any lie. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, Zola believed she could win. The day Zola decided to confront the Dumont family, the air itself seemed charged with electricity. She dressed with care, her hands steady as she buttoned her blouse and smoothed her skirt. Imani, her lawyer, met her at the curb, a folder of documents tucked under her arm and a look of fierce determination in her eyes. Mrs. Ketta watched from her porch, giving Zola a nod of encouragement. "You're not alone, child," she called softly. Zola nodded, drawing strength from the support that had grown around her like a protective shield. The Dumont mansion loomed ahead, its gates as imposing as ever. Zola's heart pounded as she walked up the drive, her son's hand in hers and Imani at her side. The butler hesitated at the door, but one look at Imani's business card and the steely set of Zola's jaw, and he stepped aside. The family was gathered in the sitting room, sunlight streaming through tall windows, the air thick with the scent of expensive flowers and old secrets. Kofi was the first to see her, his face a mask of surprise and annoyance. Mrs. Audit sat rigidly on the sofa, her lips pressed into a thin line, while Nala lounged in an armchair, her phone in hand, eyes flicking up with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Mr. Dumont stood by the fireplace, his posture relaxed but his gaze sharp, assessing. Zola took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. She would not be intimidated. "I'm here because you all deserve to know the truth," Zola began, her voice clear and unwavering. She handed the DNA results to Kofi, who scanned the document, his brow furrowing. "What is this?" he demanded. Imani stepped forward, her tone professional but unyielding. "It's a paternity test. The results show that Kofi is not the biological father of Zola's child, but the DNA matches someone else in this family, someone closely related." A stunned silence fell over the room. Mrs. Audit's face drained of color, her hands trembling as she reached for the paper. Nala's phone slipped from her grasp, clattering to the floor. Mr. Dumont's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, his expression unreadable. Kofi's anger flared. "Are you accusing my family of something? This is outrageous," he shouted, his voice echoing off the marble floors. Zola met his gaze, her own eyes blazing. "I'm not accusing, I'm demanding answers. I know what happened. I know someone in this house is responsible for what was done to me. I will not be silenced." Mrs. Audit recovered her composure, her voice icy. "You're making a spectacle of yourself, Zola. Think of your son, think of the consequences. If you go public with this, you'll destroy everything for yourself and for him." Imani stepped in, her words cutting through the tension. "The only person responsible for this destruction is the one who committed the crime. We have evidence and we're prepared to file a formal complaint. If you try to intimidate or threaten Zola, you'll only make things worse for yourselves." Nala, usually aloof, looked genuinely frightened. "Mom, what if she's telling the truth? What if Mrs. Audit silenced her with a glare?" Mr. Dumont finally spoke, his voice calm but laced with menace. "You have no proof, you have nothing but accusations and a piece of paper. Do you really think anyone will believe you over this family?" Zola's hands shook, but she stood her ground. "I have more than a piece of paper. I have my story and I have people who believe me. I'm not afraid of you anymore." The confrontation escalated, voices rising, accusations flying. Kofi accused Zola of trying to ruin him out of spite. Mrs. Audit threatened to sue for defamation. Mr. Dumont warned of consequences, his words heavy with unspoken threats, but Zola refused to back down. She repeated the facts, her voice steady, her resolve unbreakable. Imani calmly documented every word, every threat, every attempt to silence them. When it became clear that the family would not cooperate, Imani announced, "We're filing a legal complaint. The authorities will investigate and the truth will come out. If you try to interfere, you'll answer to the law." She handed copies of the documents to each family member, her professionalism unshaken by their outrage. As Zola and Imani turned to leave, Mrs. Audit hissed, "You'll regret this. You're nothing without this family's name." Zola paused at the door, her son's hand in hers. "I'd rather be nothing than live a lie. My son deserves the truth and I will fight for it, no matter what it costs." Word of the confrontation spread quickly. Within days, whispers turned to headlines. The media caught wind of the scandal, reporters calling for statements, cameras stationed outside the mansion. Some outlets painted Zola as a gold digger, others as a victim seeking justice. The community buzzed with speculation, old friends reaching out with cautious support, strangers offering words of encouragement or condemnation. Zola felt the pressure mounting, but she also felt a new sense of freedom. The secret was out. The Dumonts could no longer control the narrative. Imani worked tirelessly, filing the complaint, gathering evidence, and preparing for the legal battle ahead. Mrs. Ketta organized neighbors to support Zola, their quiet solidarity a balm against the storm of public scrutiny. Through it all, Zola held her head high. She spoke to reporters when necessary, always with dignity, never with malice. She told her story not for revenge, but for justice for herself, for her son, and for every woman who had ever been silenced by power and fear. The Dumonts tried to fight back, but the tide was turning. The truth, once buried, was rising to the surface. As the media frenzy grew, Zola realized that her life would never be the same. But she also knew that she had reclaimed her voice, her power, and her future. The confrontation had been brutal, but it was only the beginning. The real battle, won for justice, for healing, for hope, was just beginning. And this time, Zola would not fight alone. The days after the confrontation were a whirlwind of interviews, legal filings, and sleepless nights. Zola's story was everywhere on the news, in whispered conversations at the market, in the worried glances of neighbors who didn't know whether to offer comfort or keep their distance. Through it all, Zola clung to her son and to the hope that the truth would finally set them free. But nothing could have prepared her for the revelation that would come next, a truth so dark it threatened to swallow everything she thought she knew. Imani called her one morning, her voice tight with urgency. "Zola, you need to come to my office. There's something you need to see." Zola bundled her son and hurried across town, her heart pounding with dread. When she arrived, Imani was waiting with a thick file and a grim expression. "We got the results from the extended DNA analysis," she said, sliding the papers across the desk. "It's not Kofi's brother, it's not a cousin. The match is even closer." Zola's hands shook as she read the report. The words blurred, but the meaning was unmistakable. The DNA matched Kofi's father, Mr. Dumont, the patriarch, the man who had stood in his mansion denying everything, daring her to challenge his power. Zola felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It can't be. I would have remembered. I would have known." But as the memories flooded back, nights at the mansion, the strange dizziness after dinner, the way Mr. Dumont had insisted she stay when Kofi was away, she realized the truth had been hiding in plain sight. Imani reached across the desk, her hand steady. "Zola, you're not to blame. This is what men like him do. They use their power to take what they want, then cover it up. But now we have proof, and we're not the only ones who need to know." Zola's mind raced. The implications were staggering. Her son was not just the product of betrayal, but of a crime. The Dumonts' power, their wealth, their reputation, all built on secrets and silence. The next days were a blur of revelations. Imani's investigation uncovered more than just the DNA results. There were whispers of other women, maids, assistants, even distant relatives who had left the Dumont mansion under mysterious circumstances. Some had signed non-disclosure agreements, others had simply disappeared. Mrs. Ketta, ever resourceful, tracked down a former housekeeper who remembered Zola's confusion and illness during her stay. "He always had a way of making people feel small," the woman said, her voice trembling, "but I never thought he'd go that far." Zola was horrified. The man who had smiled at her wedding, who had toasted to her future, was a predator. The family's matriarch, Mrs. Audit, had to have known. The way she had tried to silence Zola, the coldness in her eyes, the veiled threats, it all made sense now. The Dumonts had spent years protecting their own, no matter the cost to others. Zola's case was not an isolated tragedy, but part of a pattern that stretched back decades. The stakes rose with every new piece of evidence. Imani filed an amended complaint, naming Mr. Dumont as the father and demanding a criminal investigation. The media, already hungry for scandal, seized on the new details. Headlines screamed of abuse, cover-ups, and the fall of a powerful family. Reporters camped outside the mansion, their cameras capturing every arrival and departure. The Dumonts' lawyers issued furious denials, but the tide was turning. The truth was out, and it could not be contained. Zola's world became a storm of threats and support. Some people called her brave, a hero for standing up to the powerful. Others accused her of lying, of trying to destroy a family for money or revenge. She received anonymous letters, some offering solidarity, others filled with venom. Through it all, she held her son close, whispering promises that she would never let him be defined by the sins of others. Inside the mansion, chaos reigned. Kofi was devastated, his anger turning inward as he realized the depth of his father's betrayal. Nala retreated into silence, her bravado shattered. Mrs. Audit tried to maintain control, but her authority was slipping. Mr. Dumont, once untouchable, was now the subject of a criminal investigation. His business partners distanced themselves, his friends stopped returning calls. The empire he had built on fear and silence was crumbling. But the most powerful man in the family had the most to hide. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered financial irregularities, hush money payments, and a network of enablers who had helped keep his secrets. Former employees came forward, emboldened by Zola's courage. One by one, the stories emerged of threats, of payoffs, of lives ruined to protect the Dumont name. The pattern was undeniable. The truth, once a whisper, was now a roar. Zola watched the family unravel from a distance, her emotions a tangled knot of relief, anger, and sorrow. She grieved for the life she had lost, for the innocence stolen from her and so many others. But she also felt a fierce pride. She had faced the monster and survived. She had refused to be silenced, refused to let her son grow up in the shadow of lies. The fight was not over, but the balance of power had shifted. The Dumonts could no longer hide behind their wealth and influence. The revelation changed everything. The legal case became a cause célèbre, drawing the attention of activists, politicians, and ordinary people who saw in Zola's struggle a reflection of their own battles against injustice. Imani worked around the clock, coordinating with prosecutors, gathering witnesses, and preparing for the trial that would decide not just Zola's fate, but the future of the Dumont legacy. As the sun set on another long day, Zola sat by her son's crib watching him sleep. She thought of the women who had come before her, the ones who had been silenced, the ones who had survived. She thought of the future she wanted for her child, a future free from fear, from secrets, from the weight of another man's sins. She knew the road ahead would be hard, that the Dumonts would fight to the bitter end. But she also knew she was not alone. The truth was on her side, and for the first time that was enough. The most powerful man in the family had the most to hide, but now at last the world was watching, and Zola was ready to see justice done. The news of Mr. Dumont's paternity and the allegations of abuse sent shockwaves through the city. The Dumont name, once synonymous with power and philanthropy, now appeared in headlines alongside words like scandal, cover-up, and abuse. The family's reputation, carefully built over generations, teetered on the edge of ruin. The mansion's gates, once a symbol of exclusivity, now seemed more like barriers against the world's judgment. Inside those gates, the family was in turmoil. Kofi barely left his room, haunted by the truth of his father's betrayal and the role he had played in Zola's suffering. Nala, once so quick with a cutting remark, moved through the house like a ghost, her confidence shattered. Mrs. Audit tried to maintain a facade of control, but her phone calls went unanswered, her invitations declined. The Dumonts' social circle shrank overnight, friends and business partners eager to distance themselves from the growing scandal. But the world outside was even more chaotic. Zola's days became a blur of interviews, legal meetings, and anxious walks through neighborhoods where every face seemed to hold an opinion. Some people crossed the street to avoid her, their eyes filled with suspicion or pity. Others stopped her to offer words of encouragement, their voices low but sincere. "You're brave," they whispered. "Don't let them silence you." Zola clung to these moments, drawing strength from the kindness of strangers. Yet the threats were real and relentless. Anonymous letters arrived at her door, some filled with venomous accusations, others with thinly veiled warnings. "Drop the case or you'll regret it," one note read in blocky, uneven handwriting. Her phone rang at all hours, the caller hanging up as soon as she answered. Once, a brick was thrown through her window in the middle of the night, shattering glass and nerves alike. Zola reported every incident to the police, but the investigations moved slowly, the officers' sympathy often tinged with doubt. Imani, ever vigilant, insisted on extra precautions. She helped Zola install new locks, arranged for neighbors to check in regularly, and made sure every threat was documented. "They want you to be afraid," she said, her voice steady. "But you're not alone, and you're not the only one." It was true. As the story spread, other women began to reach out, some anonymously, others in person. They told Zola their own stories of working for the Dumonts, of late-night encounters with Mr. Dumont, of whispered threats and sudden firings. Some had signed non-disclosure agreements, others had simply left in silence, too afraid to speak. One woman, a former housekeeper named Maribel, came forward with trembling hands and tear-filled eyes. "He did the same to me," she confessed. "I thought no one would believe me. But when I saw you on the news, I knew I had to speak." Another, a young woman who had interned at the Dumont Foundation, described a pattern of manipulation and intimidation that matched Zola's experience almost exactly. Each new voice added weight to Zola's case, transforming her struggle from a personal battle into a movement. The community, however, was divided. Some people rallied behind Zola, organizing vigils and marches, sharing her story on social media and demanding justice. Others clung to the old narrative, insisting that the Dumonts were victims of a smear campaign, that Zola was after money or revenge. The local paper ran editorials on both sides, and talk radio hosts debated the case for hours. At church, the pastor offered prayers for all those affected by recent events, careful not to take sides. Zola felt the tension everywhere she went, the city itself holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The media frenzy only intensified. Reporters camped outside Zola's modest home, their cameras trained on her door. They followed her to the grocery store, to the courthouse, to the park where she took her son for fresh air. Some were respectful, asking thoughtful questions and listening to her answers. Others shouted accusations, hoping to provoke a reaction. Zola learned to keep her head down, to answer only when she chose, to protect her son from the worst of the attention. Through it all, Zola found unexpected allies. Mrs. Keta organized a network of neighbors to walk with her, to run errands, to keep watch at night. Imani's legal team grew as more lawyers volunteered their time and expertise. Even some members of the press, moved by Zola's courage, began to dig deeper, uncovering more evidence of the Dumonts' long history of silencing dissent. The case became a rallying point for women across the city, a symbol of resistance against power and privilege. But the pressure was immense. Zola worried constantly for her son's safety, for her own sanity. She missed the quiet life she had once known, the simple joys of working at the library, of sharing meals with her mother. She grieved for the future she had imagined, a future now forever changed, yet she refused to give in to despair. Each day she reminded herself why she was fighting, for her son, for the women who had come before her, for the truth that could no longer be hidden. As the trial date approached, the city buzzed with anticipation. The Dumonts' lawyers filed motion after motion, trying to delay the proceedings, to discredit Zola, to bury the evidence. But Imani was relentless, countering every move with calm precision. The judge, under intense public scrutiny, refused to be swayed by the family's influence. "Justice will be served," he declared, his words echoing through the packed courtroom. On the eve of the trial, Zola stood at her window, looking out at the city lights. She thought of the women who had reached out, of the neighbors who had stood by her, of the son who slept peacefully in the next room. She knew the road ahead would be hard, that the threats might never fully disappear, that the scars would remain. But she also knew she was no longer alone. The truth had found its voice, and it was louder than any lie. The Dumonts' reputation was in tatters, their secrets exposed. The community was forever changed, divided but awakened. And Zola, once silenced and shamed, now stood at the center of a movement she had never asked for but would never abandon. The aftermath was messy, painful, and uncertain, but it was also the beginning of something new. The world was watching, and Zola was ready to face whatever came next. The courthouse was a fortress of stone and glass, its steps crowded with reporters, activists, and curious onlookers. Zola stood at the entrance, her heart pounding, her son's small hand wrapped tightly in hers. Imani was at her side, her face set with determination, a thick folder of evidence clutched to her chest. Behind them, Mrs. Keta and a group of neighbors offered quiet words of encouragement, their presence a reminder that Zola was no longer fighting alone. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. The Dumonts arrived in a convoy of black cars, their lawyers in tailored suits, their faces carefully composed. Mr. Dumont walked with the confidence of a man used to bending the world to his will, his eyes cold and unyielding. Mrs. Audit sat beside him, her expression unreadable, while Kofi and Nala kept their distance, the family's unity shattered by the weight of their secrets. The judge called the court to order, his gavel echoing through the hushed room. The prosecution began by laying out the case, the DNA evidence, the pattern of abuse, the testimonies of women who had worked for the Dumonts. Imani presented each piece of evidence with calm precision, her voice steady even as the defense objected, delayed, and tried to discredit every witness. Zola watched as the truth she had fought so hard to uncover was laid bare for all to see. The defense was ruthless. They painted Zola as a liar, a woman scorned, a gold digger seeking revenge. They called character witnesses who spoke of Mr. Dumont's generosity, his philanthropy, his role as a pillar of the community. But for every glowing testimonial, Imani countered with hard facts, financial records, medical reports, and the stories of women who had been silenced for years. The courtroom became a battleground, each side fighting for control of the narrative. Zola took the stand, her hands trembling but her voice clear. She told her story in painstaking detail, the night she felt dizzy at the mansion, the confusion and fear, the isolation that followed. She spoke of the letter, the DNA results, the threats and intimidation. She looked directly at Mr. Dumont, refusing to flinch under his icy stare. "You took everything from me," she said, her voice breaking, "but you will not take my son's future, you will not take my voice." The room was silent as she finished, the weight of her words settling over the crowd. The judge nodded, his expression grave. "Thank you, Ms. Dumont, your courage is noted." One by one, other women came forward. Maribel, the former housekeeper, described her own experience, her voice shaking but resolute. The young intern from the Dumont Foundation spoke of manipulation and fear. Each testimony chipped away at the family's facade, revealing the rot beneath the surface. Mr. Dumont's lawyers fought back with every tool at their disposal. They filed motions to dismiss accused witnesses of lying and tried to have evidence thrown out. They called in favors, hoping to sway the judge to delay the inevitable, but the tide had turned. The public was watching, the media relentless in their coverage. Every attempt to silence Zola only made her story louder, her resolve stronger. The most dramatic moment came when Kofi took the stand. He spoke haltingly at first, his eyes downcast, but as he recounted the events that had led to the trial, his voice grew stronger. I was blind, he admitted. I believed my father over my wife. I let pride and fear guide me, but I know the truth now. I know what my father did, and I stand with Zola. The courtroom murmured, the impact of his words rippling through the crowd. Mr. Dumont, for his part, remained defiant. He denied everything, his testimony a web of half-truths and evasions. He spoke of his legacy, his contributions to the city, his love for his family. But the evidence was overwhelming, the testimonies too consistent to ignore. The prosecution pressed him, their questions sharp and unrelenting. For the first time, cracks appeared in his composure. He grew angry, defensive, his mask slipping as the truth closed in. The trial stretched on for days, each session more intense than the last. Zola sat through every moment, her hands clenched, her heart aching for the women who had suffered in silence. She watched as the community rallied around her, as strangers sent letters of support, as old friends reached out to apologize for their doubts. She felt the weight of their hope, their belief that justice was possible. When the closing arguments were made, the courtroom was packed. Imani spoke with quiet passion, her words a call to action. This is not just about one woman or one family. This is about power and the abuse of power. It is about the courage to speak the truth even when the world tries to silence you. It is about justice for Zola, for her son, for every woman who has ever been afraid. The defense countered with warnings of false accusations, of reputations destroyed, of families torn apart. But their words rang hollow in the face of so much pain, so much evidence. The jury deliberated for hours, the city holding its breath. When the verdict was finally read, the room erupted in a mix of relief and disbelief. Mr. Dumont was found guilty on multiple counts: abuse, coercion, obstruction of justice. The judge's sentence was swift and severe, a message to all who thought themselves above the law. Zola wept as the gavel fell, her son in her arms, her allies at her side. The final battle had been won not just for herself, but for every woman who had ever been told to keep quiet, to endure, to survive in silence. The courtroom emptied, the cameras flashed, and the world moved on. But Zola knew that something had changed, that the truth had finally triumphed over fear. She walked out of the courthouse into the sunlight, her head held high, her son's laughter ringing in her ears. The scars would remain, but so would the strength she had found. The final battle was over, but her story, her life, was just beginning. The verdict echoed through the city like a thunderclap. For decades, the Dumont name had been a shield, a symbol of untouchable power and privilege. Now it was a cautionary tale. The news of Mr. Dumont's conviction swept across television screens and front pages, the once revered patriarch now a disgraced criminal. The judge's sentence was clear and uncompromising: a lengthy prison term, hefty fines, and a public statement condemning his abuse of power. The courtroom, once a stage for intimidation and denial, became the place where justice finally spoke for those who had been silenced. Zola sat in the front row, her son on her lap, as the sentence was read. She felt a wave of relief, exhaustion, and bittersweet triumph. The fight had cost her nearly everything: her peace, her privacy, her dreams of a simple life, but it had also given her something she never expected: a sense of purpose, a voice that could not be taken away. She looked at her son, his eyes wide and curious, and knew she had done what she set out to do. She had protected him. She had told the truth. The Dumont family, once united in public displays of wealth and influence, was now fractured. Mrs. Audit left the courthouse with her head bowed, her composure finally broken. Nala disappeared from the public eye, her social media accounts wiped clean, her name now whispered with pity rather than envy. Kofi, pale and drawn, approached Zola outside the courthouse, his hands shaking as he tried to find the words. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice raw. "I should have believed you. I should have protected you. I let my father's shadow blind me to the truth." Zola listened, her heart heavy with memories of what they once shared. She saw the regret in Kofi's eyes, the pain of a man who had lost not only his father but his own sense of self. For a moment she remembered the early days, the laughter, the hope, the promises whispered in the dark. But those days were gone, replaced by scars that would never fully heal. "I forgive you," she said quietly, "but I can't go back. I have to move forward for myself and for our son." The court awarded Zola full custody, recognizing not only her devotion as a mother but the danger and betrayal she had endured. The judge ordered the Dumont estate to provide financial support for the child, ensuring that Zola would never again have to choose between dignity and survival. The ruling was a public rebuke of the family's attempts to silence her, a declaration that no amount of money or influence could erase the truth. In the weeks that followed, Zola's life slowly began to settle. The media frenzy faded, replaced by quieter stories of healing and hope. She moved into a small apartment filled with sunlight and laughter, her son's toys scattered across the floor, the walls adorned with drawings and photographs. She returned to work at the library, welcomed back by colleagues who had watched her struggle and now celebrated her strength. The community, once divided, began to rally around her, inspired by her courage and resilience. Letters arrived from women across the country, some sharing their own stories of survival, others simply offering thanks for her bravery. Zola read each one, her heart swelling with empathy and resolve. She joined a support group for survivors, her presence a beacon for those still searching for their own voices. She spoke at local schools and community centers, her story a reminder that justice was possible, that silence could be broken. Kofi visited often, always respectful, always careful to let Zola set the boundaries. He played with their son in the park, read him bedtime stories, and tried to rebuild a relationship based on honesty and trust. Zola saw the effort, the genuine remorse, but she knew that forgiveness did not mean forgetting. She was grateful for his presence in their child's life, but she no longer needed him to complete her own. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the city, Zola sat on her balcony, her son curled up beside her. She watched the world go by, the ordinary beauty of people living, loving, and moving forward. She thought of the women who had come before her, the ones who had been silenced, the ones who had survived. She thought of the future she was building, not just for herself, but for every woman who had ever been told to keep quiet, to endure, to survive in the shadows. Justice had been served, but Zola knew the work was not finished. There were still stories to tell, still battles to fight, still lives to rebuild. She was no longer the woman who had entered the hospital alone and afraid. She was a survivor, a mother, a voice for the voiceless. She had chosen her own path, and she would walk it with her head held high. As evening fell, Zola whispered a promise to her son. "You are not defined by the past. You are loved, you are strong, and you are free." The words lingered in the air, a blessing and a vow. The Dumont's power was broken, their secrets exposed, but Zola's story was just beginning. She had found her strength, her purpose, and her peace. And in the quiet of that new life, she knew she would never be silenced again. In the quiet that followed the storm, Zola found herself looking back on the path she had walked, a journey marked by heartbreak, betrayal, and fear, but also by courage, resilience, and the discovery of her own unbreakable spirit. There were nights when she thought she would not survive, when the weight of shame and isolation threatened to crush her. She remembered the hospital room, the coldness in Kofi's eyes, the humiliation of being cast out by the family she had once called her own. She remembered the hunger, the loneliness, the endless questions that had no answers. But she also remembered the moments when hope flickered, when a kind word or a helping hand reminded her that she was not alone. Zola realized now that her pain had not been in vain. Every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt had forged her into someone stronger than she ever imagined. She had learned to trust her instincts, to fight for her truth, and to protect her child with a fierceness that nothing could shake. She had learned that silence was not safety, that secrets only grew in the dark, and that the only way to break the cycle was to speak, to stand, to refuse to be erased. She thought of the women who had reached out to her, some with stories so similar it was as if they had lived her life, others with words of encouragement and gratitude. She thought of Mrs. Ketta, of Amani, of the neighbors who had walked beside her when the world seemed determined to shut her out. She thought of her son, whose laughter was now the soundtrack of her days, whose innocence reminded her of all that was worth fighting for. Zola knew that her victory was not hers alone. It belonged to every woman who had ever been told to keep quiet, to endure, to accept less than she deserved. Sitting by her window, Zola let the memories wash over her, not with bitterness but with a sense of peace. She had faced the worst and survived. She had lost almost everything, but in the end she had found herself. She wanted other women to know that they too could survive, that even in the darkest moments there was a way forward, that the world could be cruel, but it could also be changed, one voice, one story, one act of courage at a time. "If you've ever felt alone," Zola would say, her voice steady and warm, "remember you are stronger than you think. You are not defined by what was done to you, but by what you choose to do next. There will be days when you want to give up, when the world seems too heavy, when the pain feels endless. But hold on, reach out, speak your truth. There are people who will listen, who will stand with you, who will help you find your way back to the light." She encouraged women to trust themselves, to seek help, to believe that justice was possible. She reminded them that their stories mattered, that their voices could change lives, that their courage could inspire others. Zola's journey had been long and hard, but it had taught her the most important lesson of all, that hope is a choice, and that every day is a chance to begin again. As the sun set and the city lights flickered on, Zola felt a quiet joy settle in her heart. She had survived, she had overcome, and she would never be silenced again. Her story was a testament to the power of truth, the strength of women, and the promise that even after the darkest night, the dawn will come. The seasons changed, and with them so did Zola's life. The city that once felt cold and unforgiving now seemed to open its arms, welcoming her into a new chapter. She moved into a sunlit apartment on a quiet street where laughter echoed off the walls and the scent of home-cooked meals drifted through open windows. Her son, now a little older, filled the rooms with his questions and his joy, his small hands reaching for hers as they explored the world together. Their home was not grand, but it was safe, warm, and filled with love, a place where the past could not reach them. Zola's days were busy but purposeful. She returned to the library, her old job waiting for her with open arms. The familiar scent of books and the gentle hush of turning pages brought her comfort, a reminder of the girl she once was and the woman she had become. But Zola's journey had given her a new mission, one that reached far beyond the library's walls. She saw the need in the eyes of other women at the grocery store, at the park, in the waiting rooms of clinics and schools. She recognized the quiet desperation, the silent questions, the longing for hope. With the help of Amani and Mrs. Ketta, Zola founded a support group for women who had faced abuse, injustice, or betrayal. They met in the community center every week, gathering in a circle of folding chairs and shared stories. At first, only a handful of women came, their voices tentative, their pain still raw. But word spread, and soon the room was filled with women of all ages and backgrounds, some survivors, some still searching for the courage to speak. Zola listened to each story with compassion, offering not just advice but understanding and solidarity. The group became a lifeline, a place where women could find strength in each other and in themselves. They shared resources, celebrated victories, and mourned setbacks together. Zola watched as friendships blossomed, as women who had once felt powerless began to reclaim their lives. She saw the ripple effect of hope, the way one woman's courage could inspire another and another until the whole community began to change. The support group grew into a network, then a movement, with volunteers offering legal aid, counseling, and emergency shelter. Zola's living room became a hub of activity, her phone ringing late into the night with calls for help and messages of gratitude. Through it all, Zola never lost sight of her own healing. She made time for quiet mornings with her son, for walks in the park, for evenings spent reading stories and building pillow forts. She learned to forgive not just those who had hurt her but herself, for the moments when she doubted, when she was afraid, when she almost gave up. She found peace in the small things, the sound of her son's laughter, the warmth of sunlight on her face, the knowledge that she had survived and could help others do the same. Zola's story became a beacon for others. She was invited to speak at schools, churches, and conferences, her words reaching women who had never heard their own experiences reflected back at them. She wrote articles, gave interviews, and worked with local leaders to improve protections for survivors. Each time she shared her story, she saw the impact it had, the way women sat a little taller, spoke a little louder, believed a little more in their own worth. But Zola knew her story was not unique. There were countless women whose voices had not yet been heard, whose battles were still being fought in silence. She wanted them to know that they were not alone, that their pain was real, and that healing was possible. She wanted to build a world where no woman had to choose between safety and silence, where justice was not a privilege but a right. So now, as she sits at her kitchen table, her son drawing pictures beside her, Zola turns to you, the listener, the reader, the woman who may be carrying her own secret burdens. She invites you to share your story, to reach out for help, to offer support to someone in need. She reminds you that every voice matters, that every act of courage creates a ripple, that together we can build a community where hope and justice are not just dreams but realities. If you have a story to tell, tell it, Zola says, her voice gentle but strong. If you see someone struggling, reach out. If you feel alone, know that you are not. There is strength in numbers, in solidarity, in the simple act of standing together. We are all part of this story, and together we can write a new ending, one filled with hope, with healing, and with justice. Zola's journey is not over. There will be new challenges, new battles, new stories to tell. But she faces the future with open eyes and an open heart, ready to help others find their own path to freedom. She dreams of a world where every woman can walk without fear, where every child grows up knowing they are safe and loved, where the cycle of silence is finally broken. And so, as the sun sets on another day, Zola invites you to join her. Share your story, support someone else, be the light in someone's darkness, because together we are stronger than we think. And together we can change the world, one story, one act of kindness, one moment of courage at a time. Stay tuned for more stories of hope and justice, for more voices rising from the shadows, for more proof that even in the darkest times there is always a way forward. Zola's story is just one among many, but it is a reminder that every ending is also a beginning, and that the power to change lives lies within us all.